Hi, welcome to my video on the powers of an imaginary number I. Note, square root of -1 is I to the 1 or I. Square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is 2. The square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is 3. Square root of 4 times the square root of 4 is 4. Note, when you multiply a square root by itself, you get this number underneath the root. So therefore, root of a -2 times the root of a -2 is -2. The root of a -3 times the root of a -3 is a -3. Root of -4 times the root of a -4 is -4. When you multiply a square root by itself, you get the number underneath the root. So the square root of a -1 times the square root of -1 is a -1. Let's look at another way. The square root of a -1 is an I. The square root of a -1 is an I. And that gives me I squared. Hence, I squared is -1. Notice these two are the same. These two are the same. So therefore, I squared must be -1. Note, it's wrong to go the square root of -1 times the square root of -1 is the square root of a -1 times -1, which is 1, which square root of 1, which gives me 1. This is not true, because anytime you have the square root of a negative number, you have to write it with an I. So that's I squared. So you cannot multiply these two together to get the square root of 1, which is 1. You have to simplify first. Let's do some more powers. I cubed is I squared times I, which is -1 times I, which is -I. And I to the fourth is I squared times I squared, which is -1 times -1, which is 1. And I to the 5 is I4 times I. And I to the fourth power is 1 times I, which gives me I. I'm writing all of these right now in terms of the power of 4. But the power of I to the fourth is 1. So I to the fourth times I squared. Notice that's a 1. When you multiply these two, you add your exponents. So 6 is made up of 4 plus 2. I to the fourth is 1. I squared is -1. So we get a -1. And I to the 7 is I to the 4 times I cubed. Again, when you multiply like bases, you add your exponents. I to the fourth is 1. I cubed is I cubed I cubed -I, which gives me -I, which gives me -I. And I to the 8th is I to the 4 times I to the 4. And I to the fourth power is 1. I to the fourth power is 1. So we get 1 times 1 is 1. If you notice the pattern, you get a 1, you get an I, you get a -1, you get a -I. So notice that I to the fourth is 1, and 1 could be I to the 0. Notice that 1 could be I to the 0, because any number to the 0 power is 1, except 0 itself. So we have, notice, we have a I to the 0, I to the 1, I to the 2, I to the 3, see, I to the 2, I to the 3, that's what they work out to be. So, let's turn over and see what we have. I to the 0 comes out to be a 1. I to the 1 is I squared is -1, I cubed is -I. So I have these memorized. I to the 0, 1. I squared is -1, I cubed is -I. Now, let's look at another way of handling this when you have larger powers. Here we go. Another pattern. I, powers of I, I'm going to call P, and the remainder I'm going to call R. So powers of I are 4. So we have a power of I 4. So we get 4 divided by 4 is 1, and the remainder is 0. So that remainder is 0 is I to the 0, which is 1. The power, P, is the power. Power is 5 divided by 4 gives me a 1 and 1 left over. So 4 goes into 5 once and 1 left over. So the remainder is 1. So there's I to the 1, or I. So I to the 5. Just on the previous video, we did I to the 5 is I to the 4 times I. And I to the 4 was a 1. So we ended up with an I. Again, 6. 6 divided by 4. 4 into 6 goes once, and remainder is 2. So I squared is -1. 7 divided by 4 is 1, with a remainder of 3. Remainder is 3, so that's I cubed. And I cubed is -I. 8, any multiple of 4 will give you a 0, because 8 divided by 4 gives you 2 with a remainder of 0. So I to the 0 is 1. 9 divided by 4. 4 goes into 9 twice with a remainder of 1. So that's I to the 1, which is I. 10 divided by 4. 4 into 10 goes 2 with a remainder of 2. So that's I squared, which is -1. 11 divided by 4 is 2, the remainder of 3. So the remainder is 3, so I cubed is negative. I put an equal signs here, but I don't have to put the equal signs for it. So it's, -I. 12 divided by 4. 4 into 12 is 3, with a remainder of 0. I to the 0 is 1. 13 divided by 4. 4 into 13 goes 3, with a remainder of 1. So I to the 1 is I. 14 divided by 4. 4 into 14 goes 3, with a remainder of 2. So I squared is -1. 15 is the power divided by 4. 4 into 15 goes 3, with a remainder of 3. Remainder is 3, so it's I cubed, which is -I. 16 is the power divided by 4. 4 into 16 goes 4, with a remainder of 0. So I to the 0 is 1. So hopefully you see the pattern. So notice all powers of all multiples of 4. 4 gives me a 1. 8 is a multiple, gives me a 1. 12 is a multiple of 4, gives me a 1. 16 is a multiple of 4, gives me a 1. 20 divided by 4 is 5, with a remainder of 0. I to the 0 is 1. 37 divided by 4. And 4 nines are 36. And we get 4 nines is 36 and 1 left over. So that's I to the 1, or I. 46 divided by 4. 46 divided by 4 gives me 11, which is 44, and there's 2 left over. That's I squared, which is -1. 63 divided by 4 gives me 15, and 4 times 15 is 60, so that's a remainder of 3. So I cubed is -I. 80 divided by 4. 80 divided by 4 is 20, with a remainder of 0. I to the 0 is 1. 99 divided by 4 gives me a 24, with a remainder of 3. So I cubed is the remainder, I cubed, which is -I. And we have 101 divided by 4. 4 into 101 is 25. And 4 times 25 is 100, so there's 1 left over. So that's I to the 1, or I. And we get 126 divided by 4. We get a 31. And we get the remainder of 2. So that's I squared, which is negative 1. And we got a 248. 248 divided by 4 gives me a 62. And the remainder is 0. So I to the 0 is 1. Hopefully you see the pattern. But you have to memorize that I to the 0, if the remainder is 0, is 1. And if you get a 1, then you get an I. I squared is negative 1. I cubed is negative I. Memorize. I have to memorize. Let's practice again. Pause your video and see if you can work these out yourself. What is I to the 0? 1. I to the 1 is just I. I squared is negative 1. I cubed is negative I. So I have 1 I, negative 1 I. So simplify these. So what's 6 divided by 4? It gives me 1, yes, 4 into 6 goes 1 with a remainder of 2. So that gives me I squared, which is negative 1. And 9 divided by 4, 4 goes into 9 twice with a remainder of 1. So I to the 1, which is just I. 12 divided by 4 gives me a 3, a remainder of 0. So I to the 0 gives me a 1. So 12, I to the 12 is 1. 7 divided by 4 gives me a 3. Oh, now it's 3. No, I'm thinking about a remainder now when I do that. 4 into 7 goes 1 with a remainder of 3. So I cubed is negative I. 52 divided by 4 gives me a 13 with a remainder of 0. I to the 0 is 1. Again, I to the 52 is 1. 45 divided by 4 gives me 11, which is 44, and a remainder of 1. So it gives me I to the 1, or I. 83 divided by 4. 83 divided by 4 gives me a 20 and a remainder of 3. So I cubed is negative I. So I to the 83 is negative I. 102 divided by 4. 102 divided by 4 gives me a, let's see, 36. Let's see. Sometimes we 2, 8, 22. 4 5s are 20. So that's a 25 with a remainder of 2. I squared is negative 1. And 144 divided by 4 gives me a 36 with a remainder of 0. I to the 0 is 1. And 167 divided by 4 gives me a 41 with a remainder of 3. So I cubed is negative I. So you divide your power. If it's larger than 4, you divide your power by 4 and pick up your remainder. Whatever remainder is, you put I to that remainder power and convert. Again, I to the 0 is 1. I to the 1 is I. I squared is negative 1. I cubed is negative I. Follow the pattern and work out the powers of I by following the pattern. If you like my video, click on the like button, subscribe button, notification bell. Visit my math website, www.mathfullyexplained.com, to find more information about me, my videos, and the content. And that's the content that's on my YouTube channel called Math Fully Explained. Thank you for viewing my video. Bye-bye.